Okay, guys, today we're talking about culture and civilization. So, this is a continuation of what we were talking about the other day when we talked about the Neolithic Revolution and how that led to civilization. So, civilization is the organization of complex societies, and culture is the way of life that people follow. So, we're going to take a look at these things today in this lecture. So, just an overview, we're going to first talk about culture. And we can break down the study of culture into three areas: culture itself, cultural diffusion, and ethnocentrism. So, culture, plain and simple, is the way of life that people follow. So, this is usually passed down from generation to generation, meaning from mother and father to sons and daughters to their sons and daughters, and so on and so forth. And it could really mean a lot of different things to people. Generally, we're talking about traditions or maybe religion plays a big part in culture. It really depends on a number of things. So, if we look at the elements of culture, we could see that culture is made up of what we call tag-large here. All right, so traditions, things that you may have done in the past or continue to do because somebody else has done them before. Accomplishments, things that you have achieved. All right, maybe some type of building. Maybe you're prominent for a type of chili, maybe in your family. So something that may be an element of your culture at home. You never know. Geography, where you're from, affects how you live. Okay, we're going to see some groups of people that lived in the mountains that affected the way that they lived and they farmed. Your language and writing is very indicative of your culture. Okay, what languages you speak. So maybe some of you speak different languages at home than you do at school. So that's part of your culture as well. Art and architecture. So art's pretty straightforward. Sculptures, paintings, etc. Architecture is buildings. We're talking about anything built. All right. So an example of architecture in the Syracuse area would be the courthouse. It's all right. It's a good example there. Your religion. So, what do you believe about this life? What do you believe about the afterlife? Plays a part in your culture. Your government. How society is organized in order to be ran smoothly, make sure there's lots of order, and then ethics. Ethics tends to deal with your value system and what do you do in your life and why do you do what you do in your life. Okay? So, cultural diffusion. So, in most cases, culture isn't something that is isolated. Generally, we have all sorts of different cultures interacting with one another. So, a perfect example is if you take a look at this picture here, you can see obviously the McDonald's logo up at the top of the banner there, and you see this kind of squiggles in the middle here. Okay, this is Arabic writing, meaning that this McDonald's location is somewhere in the Middle East. So, we're talking about an American company brought over to the Middle East somewhere where their culture is quite different from ours. So, this is an example of cultural diffusion, which is the share or spreading of culture from one area to another through trade, travel, and lots of times throughout history, warfare. But in some cases, culture is something where it's a point of pride, and people don't like to share their culture or have this idea that their culture is superior to others. So we call this ethnocentrism, the belief that your culture is better than any other cultures. So in particular, we're going to talk about China in the next couple of weeks here. And early Chinese civilization was isolated from other parts of the world, and for that reason, they thought that they were at the center of the universe, the center of the world, and therefore that their culture was the height of any civilizations that ever had existed. Alright, so now we're going to switch gears and talk about civilization. So, civilization, we're talking about a highly complex social order, and this is piggybacking off of what we talked about in the last lecture at the end of it with the Neolithic Revolution or the Agricultural Revolution. So, just as a reminder, this is when people stopped being nomads and stopped wandering around from place to place hunting and gathering food and decided to stay in one place in a farm and domesticate animals. So this is going to have a snowball effect as now people can stay in one spot and they have more food to go around, which leads to a bigger surge in population, which leads to larger societies, which needs them to be governed, and then people perform specialized jobs and other things, leading to complex societies. So a lot of the elements that we saw in culture, we're going to see civilizations contain many of the same elements. So a quick overview, what are some elements of civilization? All right. In our early studies, we're going to see that most of them are going to be located in cities, have some form of centralized government, traditional economy, some type of religion, specialized jobs, system of writing, roads, bridges, other works, art and architecture, and social classes. So what we're going to do now is take a look at each of these and kind of break them down so you can understand them a little bit better. So governments, the need for governments really came about because you have a large group of people. And think of like the fair, okay? We have hundreds of thousands of people going to the fair every year. And at any given point, there can be conflict amongst those people. If we didn't have any type of policemen or policewomen there, all right, there could be some serious issues. So with large concentrations of people, you need some type of government, all right, to keep the peace, for protection, for unity, for law, for justice, for welfare. All right. So early on, governments were from hereditary rule. So we're talking about monarchies. So if we have a king, when he dies, the rule then passes down to his son, and then to his son, and so on and so forth. All right, religions. Most of the places that we're going to talk about in the earliest civilizations had some type of religion, and most of them were polytheistic, meaning that they believed in many gods. So a way to remember polytheistic, think of like math class, polygon, polynomial, poly meaning many, okay? Polygon is a geometric figure with many sides, okay? So poly, many. And anytime you see something with theistic or theism, we're talking about religion and gods. Okay, so polytheistic belief in many gods. And in a lot of cases, people believe that these gods controlled forces of nature. So there was a god of the sun, god of the wind, god of the seas. And by giving offerings to these gods and praying to them, they could hopefully control their own fate. Job specialization. So job specialization is that everybody has their own job that they can do. So with large groups of people, it wouldn't make sense to have everybody be a farmer because say there was a neighboring civilization and they saw how much food you had, they could come in, they could attack you and take your food. So you're going to need warriors to protect the society. So in early civilizations, some of the different jobs were warriors, like I said, officials who ran the government and made sure that society operated smoothly, priests to conduct religious rituals, builders to make buildings, and craftsmen. So these were carpenters or people that worked with metal to make tools. Okay, so each of these jobs had a specific function and made sure that society ran smoothly. All right, social classes. So this isn't something that they said when they made civilizations. They sat down and said, "All right, we're gonna make social classes. Everyone's gonna fall into these categories." It kind of just happened. Social classes generally look like pyramids, meaning that at the very, very top there are fewer amounts of people, but they have the most power. So in places around the world, in the ancient world, we're going to see at the top we have priests, nobles, and kings, people that ruled, that had the most power, followed by merchants or artisans, were in the middle, and then at the very, very bottom we had farmers, and the lowest people were the slaves. So here's an example from ancient Egypt that we'll talk about a little bit more in a couple weeks here. The pharaoh was the god king who was at the very, very top. Okay, again, you can see the pyramid, very small at the top, very few number of people. Followed by priests and nobles who were landowners, traders, artisans, farmers, and then unskilled workers and slaves at the very, very bottom. Okay, so one key concept I'm going to point your attention to the left here is the idea of social mobility. All right, or the ability to move between social classes in one's lifetime. So generally, we're not talking about the pharaoh saying, "Oh, I think it would be a great idea to be an unskilled worker." No, we're talking about what's the opportunities for these farmers or herders or unskilled workers to become maybe tradespeople or artisans. How easy is it to do that? Or is it a matter of when you're born into the class of being an unskilled worker? Do you have to be in that class for the rest of your life? All right, so we're going to talk about this in our society in class a little bit more in the next couple of days. All right, art and architecture. So here's a great example from the ancient world right here on this page, the pyramids of Giza. All right, architecture is a way that ancient peoples showed their religious beliefs or tried to honor some type of king or queen. All right, so the pyramids, if you didn't know, were built in order to bury the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. All right, so this is an example of showing values and beliefs of the people, all right, honoring their dead. Art could be anything from a painting, a cave painting in the earliest circumstances, to pieces of pottery, to sculptures, again, showing what these people valued and what they were all about. All right, public works. So public works are things that are done to make sure that society runs as smoothly as possible. And these are things that still exist to this day. And so we're talking about building roads, bridges, defensive walls, and in more advanced places like India, we're going to see they use things like plumbing and irrigation. So to this day, public works are done by the government, paid through by our tax money in order to make sure that society runs smoothly. So an example of a public work would be those guys in the orange vests working on the thruway, making sure that the roads are smooth, maybe repaving it to make sure that people can get to where they need to go as safely as possible. So it's something done to make sure that society as a whole benefits. All right, and the last thing we're going to discuss today is writing. So we talked about in the prehistoric lecture that early people didn't have any sources of writing. All right, over time, as people began to settle down, writing became useful for record keeping, especially when it came to farming. So the farmers would use writing to determine what they're going to plant this year based on what maybe worked in the past for them. All right, so farming records were useful with writing, keeping track of taxes, what was traded between people, laws were eventually written down, and calendars, keeping track of dates and religious ceremonies using early calendars. All right, now a lot of the early writing that we'll see in the ancient world were pictographs, and pictographs were pictures that represented words or sometimes letters. So over here we have the Egyptian system of hieroglyphics. So each hieroglyph in this grid here represents a certain letter. All right. So this is very common for early ancient writing, is to be used as pictographs. So as society advanced, we'll start to see more letter formation, which leads to word formation to the written language that we think of today. All right. So again, as always, make sure that you have got down all the notes that you need. Answer any questions. Write down any questions from me. Okay. And I will see you guys in class next time.